The first Atlantic area of interest has been issued, and parts of the Gulf Coast are going to need to pay attention. What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk about. This morning, the NHC has issued their first area of interest for tropical development in the Gulf region that we're going to be talking about today. That is going to be coming from Tropical Storm Christina. The remnants of that will be moving into the Gulf, and we'll have to see how things pan out from there. In this video, we're going to be talking about potential tropical development, if it could happen, and when it would happen if it were the case. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. Starting off right here, we have Tropical Storm Christina remaining a relatively weak tropical storm, winds of 40 miles per hour, minimum central pressure of 1,006 millibars. That is going to be moving through and making landfall in El Salvador in the next day or so. But the lead up from that to what will happen in the Atlantic is going to be pretty interesting. And as of now, the National Hurricane Center has put out the lemon, they've put out the yellow, they've put out the first area of interest right here. Not necessarily giving a large chance of development with this right here, but definitely something the NHC has tagged, and it's definitely something we're going to be discussing. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it and talk about it for you guys right here. A broad area of low pressure could form over the Bay of Campeche late this week. Conditions are not expected to be favorable for significant development, and the system should move further inland over eastern Mexico late this weekend. 10% chance in formation in the next 7 days. May not seem like that much right now, but we'll have to watch it. This is a situation that we're going to want to monitor. The main reason that we are is because regardless of development, there does appear that there's going to be some impacts involved, whether it's gusty winds or some pretty bad flash flooding, especially in the more mountainous areas of Mexico or even the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, as some models, especially the hurricane models, are calling for tropical development to move through that region as well. So we have a lot to go over. So we're going to go ahead and start by talking about the ensembles. We're going to talk about the operational. We're just going to go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to look at if this is going to develop and when will it, if it does, and kind of what kind of timetable it does, as well as the conditions too. So if you're cool with that, let's go ahead and get into it. Here is your European ensembles, ladies and gentlemen. Christina is expected to make landfall in El Salvador in the next day or so, and then it's expected to start moving through the Central American Isthmus and eventually emerge in the Gulf region over here. We're definitely going to want to pay attention to that for sure in the next 48 hours. So this is going to be by Friday. What we have right here is we're starting to see the low pressure system, at least in the ensembles, emerging in the Gulf over here off the coast of Mexico. So we're going to want to see how this pans out. Yesterday in the 0Z, we were talking about how concentrated the ensembles had become, and I wouldn't be surprised if something might happen according to that. So here's what we got for you guys right here. Let's go ahead and go to 72 hours out. So this is by Saturday right here. Look at this. A lot more ensembles are definitely starting to pop up over much of the Bay of Campeche and much of the Gulf as well. I will say, though, one thing I do want to stress and one thing I do want to make clear right here is these ensembles remain relatively weak. Round tropical depression to weak tropical storm strength at this current point in time, although you are seeing 1,004, 1,005 millibars ensembles with this, so definitely a little bit of pop could be possible with this right here. So that's what we have for 3 days out, going to 4 days out right here. You're definitely seeing a lot more concentration right here, although I will say it does remain relatively weak, even though there is a bit of a spread too with some of these ensembles. Look at how concentrated this is right here. There are more ensembles in here than I can even count, even personally right here, but the European is definitely more excited than not about this signal, although it does remain pretty weak, and we're definitely going to want to pay attention to the operational runs and the conditions to go, okay, the European is excited about this. The ensembles are excited, but what are the conditions that we're going to be seeing through with this? And then going to 5 days out right here, this is when the system would make landfall. And I can also get a bit of a clearer image of what these ensembles are definitely screaming about right here. This is what we're paying attention to. There are a couple areas in here that do have max winds of 40 to 50 knots, which is 50 to 60 miles per hour on here, although those are outliers, it seems. It seems that the majority of the ensembles want this to be around weak tropical storm strength, to say the very least. So that's definitely something we're going to want to watch out for and pay attention to as well, like tropical depression to weak tropical storm strength. That's the main topic that we're looking at right here. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start shifting over to the operational runs, and we're going to go over those, and we're going to talk about the conditions afterward. Here is our European operational run for you guys right here. This is the next day out for you guys right here. Things are getting pretty interesting across parts of the Gulf and parts of the Eastern Pacific as well. So you have Christina making landfall in El Salvador and then moving through not the Yucatan, but rather the Central American Isthmus, and then moving into the Gulf over here in the next 48 hours or so. So you have the system starting to slowly get its act together and slowly start to emerge off of here as well. We're going to be talking about conditions in just a second, but here's what we got. You have your low pressure system starting to emerge and start to slowly try to consolidate and try to get its act together. It remains relatively weak. It remains relatively messy across parts of the Gulf over here as it starts to move to the northwest and make its way towards northeastern Mexico or even southern Texas, as some of these impacts definitely could see right here. You're seeing definitely your weak low pressure system still trying to get its act together right here before making landfall by the time we get to about 90 hours out or so. So this will be by June 13th. I believe this would be Sunday afternoon, I'm pretty sure. Actually, no, it'll be Saturday afternoon. It'll be one of those throughout the weekend regardless. And look at this. We're definitely seeing some impacts from this because of how broad this system is and because of how far all that convection spreads out. You're definitely looking at some more impacts over here in parts of southern Texas right here, especially the Rio Grande Valley, Corpus Christi. According to some of this, maybe even Houston could see some scattered rain from this as well. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. But regardless of development, impacts are still very much on the table for this right here. So that's what we have for the European. Let's take a quick gander at our wind shear and our dry air as well, because yesterday when we were talking about this, we definitely saw a a larger pocket of low wind shear with this system, and you had a situation where things were starting to get a little bit more dicey in favor of tropical development. Let's see if that continues and that holds throughout the day today. You're definitely looking at this, and you're definitely noticing that shear over here in the western Gulf over here that's emerging off of this trough over here in Texas. So it's definitely over there for the first 24 to 48 hours or so. But then as the system starts to emerge off the Yucatan Peninsula, you're definitely seeing that pocket of wind shear starting to emerge over here. And you're also noticing the weakening of the wind shear over here just up to the north of it. So definitely something interesting. The models have definitely not stopped in terms of its wind shear probabilities, in terms of that low pocket of wind shear, although that pocket does start to get a bit more clouded over here, and you're definitely starting to notice that it's a bit more concentrated. It's not as widespread as what we were seeing yesterday right here, although when it emerges off the bay, off the Yucatan rather, and into the bay, you do see that pocket of wind shear that's definitely going to want to pay attention to, and definitely you're going to want to pan that out. But look at this. You're definitely noticing a bit more of a widespread spread now of that low shear, although there is this shear business over here further to the west. We're going to want to monitor that as well, because that could potentially be a slight hindrance to any potential development with this, but we're going to want to pay attention to it. But by the time we get to Friday night, though, you do start seeing this wind shear calming down and weakening as the shear over here starts to kind of emerge further into the Gulf as the system moves further to the northwest over here. Definitely something to pay attention to. Regardless, though, that pocket of low wind shear definitely remains there, and it appears to me that the European has definitely doubled down on the fact that there is that shear pocket, albeit it's not as expansive as what we were seeing yesterday. It's definitely still there, and it's definitely still somewhat favorable for some sort of development right here. Am I saying that we're going to see this big, crazy hurricane based on the fact that we have warm waters and a wind shear? No, that is not what I'm saying at all. This system is actually going to be very broad when it emerges off the Yucatan Peninsula. So in order for even that kind of scenario to happen, you would need a situation where the system would actually have to tighten up considerably and just bottom out in pressure by a pretty significant margin before we even came close to that. But ultimately, that's your situation that you have with the shear forecast for you guys right here. Taking a quick gander at the moisture component to all of this. Moisture is definitely another interesting fact that we're going to want to watch as well. Taking a quick gander at your moisture component, definitely some dry air is still present in parts of the western Gulf over here, and you do have some emerging off the coasts of Texas and Louisiana in the next day or so. But as this moisture surge starts to impact parts of Central America and then move into the Gulf region over here, this dry air definitely starts to mix out a little bit. Definitely seeing more moisture in this factor right here. What I am watching, though, is I am watching this dry air further to the west right here. How is that going to mix out? How is that going to hinder it? And the question can be answered somewhat here. You're definitely seeing a little bit of dry air doing its best to try to get into the system over here. Definitely seeing some dry air, but as I've talked about ad nauseum, this does appear to be mixable dry air. And what I mean by mixable dry air is it's not necessarily terribly dry air per se. It's enough for if a little bit of convection were to fire and kind of start mixing that out and just start to get that dry air out of there, it would not hinder development that much. That said, that dry air does remain persistent according to the European run, although it does start to slowly but surely mix out further and further away from the center according to this, although the dry air is definitely going to be a bit of a wild card right here. You're looking at warm waters, you're looking at good shear, but is the dry air going to cooperate or not? And the answer to that is a bit complicated. The answer to the best answer I can give with this is it's definitely possible for the dry air to get mixed out. For sure, you have really good warm waters that the system can kind of drive from. You're also looking at good wind shear that's not going to really hinder too much convective development and just kind of have it blowing out and all over the place. But that dry air needs to get a little bit further away from the center for things to get a bit more comfortable in terms of tropical development. And what I mean by comfortable, I mean for a better chance of that. Not that any sort of tropical development right off the coast is comfortable for millions of people. That's not what I'm trying to imply here. But ultimately, that's kind of what we're paying attention to. Dry air could be the main hindrance. That's my wild card for today right here, and I think that's why the NHC has such a low chance of development, because they're still looking at the dry air and they're going, okay, we're seeing the shear pocket, okay, we're seeing these water temperatures as well, but that dry air business isn't the most confident and isn't making us the most comfortable to go a bit further in our chances, in our odds development, so we're going to pause this right here at 10%. So that's kind of what I'm thinking is going through the NHC's heads right there. That's just my personal opinion. Follow the NHC, follow local officials as well as needed. I'm just here, I'm just a regular guy giving my professional opinion on tropics. So that's kind of what we're doing for you right here. Let's go ahead and take a gander at the hurricane models. We're going to talk about the track and then the intensity very quickly, because this is definitely something I do want to emphasize. So here are our track models for you guys. This is from Tropical Storm Christina. This is the system that's going to emerge off into the Gulf over here in the Bay of Campeche, off the Yucatan Peninsula, as the system starts to move through parts here. You're definitely seeing a bit further of a northward shift compared to what we've seen previously. Before, we were thinking it was going to maybe impact the Veracruz region and then make landfall a little bit further to the north of that. Now you're seeing a lot of the ensembles and a lot of the models concentrating near northeastern Mexico and southern Texas around the Rio Grande Valley region right here. Those are regions that do not typically see this kind of tropical development. The last time we saw this, I believe, was with Barry last year. If I know for certain it was Alberto of 2024, but I'm not 100. I think Barry was also in that region right here, but they don't typically see this kind of potential area where you could see a lot of rainfall with this. So flash flooding is going to be the main threat from this for the most part, especially in the more mountainous and more valley regions as well, like the Rio Grande, for example. You're going to want to pay attention to it. You're going to want to take it more seriously, and we'll continue to keep you updated on it. But definitely that northward shift has me a bit more concerned, especially for areas like Brownsville, Laredo, and a few other areas in Texas that could potentially see impacts like Corpus Christi. So that's what we're looking at over here. Intensity models are kind of all up in the air, remaining at weak tropical storm strength, weakening due to land interaction, and then potentially a bit of a resurgence according to some models. Over here, the CTCI wants this to get up to like a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm as it emerges off the Bay of Campeche and then makes landfall further to the south right here. I will say that is obviously an outlier right here. Is it theoretically possible? It is if it mixes out that dry air that we were talking about earlier. But ultimately, it looks to me that it's going to be either a tropical depression or a weak tropical storm. Maybe 45 miles per hour is the absolute max I would put this at. So you definitely could see some winds from this, but flash flooding does appear to be the main threat from this. And now with that being said, and kind of giving you the time frame, let's look at the rest of the operational runs and kind of go off of what they're saying, just to kind of cross-check and to kind of go, okay, we've looked at the European, we've looked at the hurricane runs. What are the rest of the operational traditionals going to show us? So we'll go ahead and start with the GFS. Even though the GFS isn't the most accurate, I've definitely roasted the GFS a lot over the years on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. I know a lot of Mets do not like the GFS either, but we're going to go ahead and show it anyway, just because, you know, it's just to throw it in the aggregate per se. We also have the Canadian and the Icon run as well. So let's go ahead and do that real quickly. Let's go ahead and pull up the GFS. We'll go ahead and pull up the 0Z run as well. Here's what we have for the GFS for you guys right here. System starts to move through much of Central America and then emerge off the Yucatan Peninsula into the Bay of Campeche. GFS is definitely showing a signal right here. You're definitely seeing that closed low, although once again the low pressure system remains pretty broad, and in order for significant organization to take place, that would really need to tighten up. But the GFS has the system moving through, potentially making landfall in the next few days, and then bringing impacts to northeastern Mexico and parts of southern Texas once again. So we're going to want to pay attention to that for those impacts. You're going to want to take it seriously regardless of that. That's what we have with the GFS. Here is the Canadian run. Canadian run has also been kind of interesting as well. Canadian has the system emerging slowly off the Yucatan Peninsula, moving into the Gulf over here. It remains a relatively large and relatively broad tropical cyclone as it starts to move through the region and starts to potentially get its act together. 1,008 millibars is what we're looking at by the time we get to Saturday morning over here. And then as it starts to emerge and starts to move towards Mexico right here, it makes landfall. It does have that closed low pressure system there, so definitely going to want to keep an eye on it. But it brings impacts mainly to northeastern Mexico and parts of southern Texas, once again, around the Rio Grande Valley. So definitely going to want to watch out, take that kind of seriously as well. Lastly, let's go ahead and show you the Icon. Even though the Icon is iconic for not being the most accurate model over here, yes, we're going to keep making those jokes. I know they're dad jokes, forgive me, but the Icon has the system starting to emerge off the Yucatan, off the Central American Isthmus, over here into the Bay. By the time we get to about 48 to 72 hours out, this is when it starts to about 60 hours out. The Icon is very large and very broad with its tropical development. Doesn't really show too much happening right away, although you have this massive, best way to describe it, massive mass, rather, of rain that's starting to emerge over here that brings a lot of impacts possibly to northeastern Mexico and South Texas. Doesn't necessarily do too much development. It does its best and it gets its act together a little bit, but by and large, it remains just too broad and too large for it to really do much significant development. So that's the situation that we're dealing with right here. First area of interest in the Atlantic for the year 2026. I'm definitely excited to go over that a bit more in the coming days, and we'll continue to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you'd like to help out, hang out, or ask us some questions, feel free to join the Storms Unite Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.